Christmas Day, 1989. As families across Europe opened presents, Romania was watching a firing squad execute its dictator live on national television. Only days before, Nicolae Ceaușescu stood on a balcony, defiant. In minutes, the crowd turned. The regime began to crack. Soldiers switched sides. Protesters took the streets. Ceaușescu fled. He didn't get far. What happened next was a revolution driven by anger, despair, and betrayal. And in the end, this man who had governed by fear met his fate in a cold courtyard, caught by his own collapsing empire. Chapter 1. The Man Who Became a God. Many Romanians hoped for reform when Nicolae Ceaușescu took over in 1965. He portrayed himself as an independent of the Soviet Union and was even critical of its invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968. The West praised him. He was even received by Queen Elizabeth, dined with Nixon, shook hands around the world. Meanwhile, however, back home, something darker was growing. Ceaușescu built a regime obsessed with control. His picture appeared in schoolrooms, factories, and on every TV broadcast. His speeches were endless, shouted from glistening balconies to orchestrated applause. The people referred to it as Ceaușima, after Hiroshima, as he demolished historic neighborhoods to build his dream, the People's Palace, one of the largest buildings in the world. He banned abortion and birth control so he could build the populace, leading to thousands of unwanted children in state-run orphanages. They rationed food. They shut off the electricity. Surveillance cameras watched everything. And his secret police, the Securitate, created one of the most feared domestic spying networks in the world. Romania transformed into a prison, disguised as a republic. And at the heart of it all was one man, untouchable, unchallenged, and worshipped like a god. Before we move on to the next section, please don't forget to subscribe if you liked the video so far. Chapter 2. A Nation on the Brink. By the late 1980s, Romania wasn't just struggling, it was suffocating. Ceaușescu had chosen to pay off the country's foreign debt, a policy internationally praised. But it came at a brutal cost domestically. Imports were slashed. Basic goods vanished. People waited in freezing lines for bread, oil, and milk, only to be turned away empty-handed. At night, cities went dark. Television was reduced to 2 hours of propaganda. Apartments were cold. Hospitals lacked medicine. Shelves were bare. But the broadcast kept smiling. The regime marched out huge crowds to cheer Ceaușescu. His wife, Elena, was hailed as a scientific genius when she had no qualifications. Throughout the country, schools would teach children to worship of what was called the presidential couple. Dissent was not merely dangerous, it was inconceivable. And yet below the surface, rage brewed. Whispers passed in queues. Families covered radios with pillows to hear forbidden foreign broadcast. The Securitate was everywhere, but fear was losing its grip. The system had turned into a theater of the absurd. At the top sat one man and his wife, convinced of their brilliance, while the people froze and starved in silence. It was as if Romania were a pressure cooker, secured tight, and the heat kept rising. Chapter 3. The Revolution Ignites. On December 16, 1989, several citizens met to show their support for Pastor Laszlo Tőkés, a Hungarian Protestant minister who attacked the regime. When the authorities threatened to evict him, the people refused to let it happen. Protest turned into defiance. The crowd grew. Soldiers arrived. Shots were fired. Blood spilled. The regime believed that fear would come back. But this time, it didn't. The news quickly leaked out, despite media blackouts. Within hours, thousands were on the streets. The army began firing, killing dozens. Some of the corpses were set in flames by militants, and others were thrown into the rivers. But it was too late. Romania was awake. Ceaușescu attempted to calm matters the only way he knew, by appearing on a balcony in Bucharest for a speech to the people. He marched onto the balcony of the Central Committee building in the main square in the center of town. He stood there for a moment, waiting for applause. Instead, they started booing, and then they started chanting. He stood there, bewildered for a second, before he raised his hands above his head, a desperate look on his face, shivering figure. "Hello, comrades!" The cameras cut. The mask had slipped, and now everyone saw through it. On the very next day, chaos engulfed the capital. Protesters fought the loyalist troops. They built barricades. The fires were lit. The army finally cracked. Some servicemen rebelled. Some kept following the orders, even for hours or days. Finally, the decisive moment came. The military itself turned on the dictator. Ceaușescu and Elena escaped by helicopter from the rooftop of the Communist Party Central Committee building on December 22nd. It was cinematic, surreal. From the sky, they gazed down on a country burning. They didn't get far. Forced to land by the army, they were captured, beaten, and handed over to the new provisional government. The Ceaușescus were gods no more. They were prisoners, confused, disheveled, and frightened. Romania reached a boiling point, and the people have finally decided to scream after years of silence. What started as a protest for the protection of one man became a nationwide revolt, swift, bloody, and unstoppable. The most closed society in Eastern Europe had just televised its dictator's fall in real time. Chapter 4. The Trial That Lasted 1 Hour. On December 25, 1989, as much of the world was unwrapping gifts, Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu were marched into a makeshift courtroom inside a military base in Târgoviște. The trial was a formality. The charges ranged from genocide to sabotage of the national economy and illegal acquisition of wealth. The proof was ambiguous, the process chaotic. The Ceaușescus refused to accept the court's authority. Elena screamed at the judges. Nicolae sang the communist anthem. But there was never any question about the sentence. They were dragged outside within an hour. A camera followed. Soldiers had slammed them into a wall. No blindfolds, no final words, just gunfire. The video was watched around the world. Here, this man, who people have feared for 24 years, fell in the snow, riddled with bullets. It wasn't just justice. It was symbolic exorcism. An entire nation cleansing itself of fear in a single moment on television. And for many, it was not real until they saw it. Want to understand the world better? Start with history and subscribe to our channel. Chapter 5. After the fall, what changed? The execution did put an end to Ceaușescu's reign, but not to Romania's agony. In the ensuing days, the streets of Bucharest and other cities teemed with celebration, confusion, and gunfire. The National Salvation Front seized power, with former Communist Party official Idi Iliescu in control, promising free elections and democracy. But many protesters wondered, revolution or merely a change of faces? Although the Securitate was dismantled formally, much of its network remained intact. Trials were promised. few materialized. Files were hidden, lost, or burned. The 1990s were economically difficult years for Romania. From corruption and inflation to unemployment, the nation was plagued. The generation who grew up under a dictatorship had to learn what freedom was and how fleeting it could be. But from that moment, something changed that could never be reversed. For the first time in decades, the Romanian people have had their say, and the world has been able to hear. The voices have brought down the person who once desired nothing but silence. And in the darkness, those voices have not fallen silent. Nicolae Ceaușescu did not die in combat. He died before a camera. His domain melted away in days, a reminder that no regime, however brutal, is immune to consequence forever. But what comes after tyranny? Justice? Chaos? Or something in between? Romania's revolution reminds us, the fall of a dictator is merely just the start to holding an entire nation accountable. What do you think? Were the people ever served justice? Or was it entirely vengeance? Drop your answers below. And if you want more stories of history's turning points, don't forget to like and subscribe. Here's another video history buffs enjoyed watching. Goodbye for now. Who was the bloodiest dictator of the 20th century? Hitler? Stalin, maybe. How about Mao? Maybe. But what if I told you there was a dictator, less famous, less talked about, who may have personally ordered the murder of 500,000 of his own citizens and got away with it? His name was Idi Amin. And while the world watched, he turned Uganda into a killing field, stuffed his fridge with severed heads, and called himself conqueror of the British Empire. But how did he rise to power from being a cook in the army? And how did he stay there for 8 blood-soaked years? Let's discuss it in today's episode of History Lights. He once fed a woman to crocodiles, bragged about eating human flesh, and kept the heads of his enemies in his fridge. And yet, he was elected chairman of the African Union in 1975. That's not a horror film. It's real history. Idi Amin ruled Uganda like a blood-soaked circus, mixing bizarre comedy with mass murder. But how did a man like that gain so much power? And why did it take a foreign army to finally take him down? Idi Amin Dada wasn't born a president or even a politician. He started at the very bottom. Born around 1925 in Kiboko in northwest Uganda to a Kakwa Muslim family, he had almost no formal education and could barely read or write. In 1946, he joined the colonial British Army as an assistant cook, basically a kitchen helper in uniform. But Amin was huge, 6 feet 4 inches tall, and naturally athletic. In fact, he became Uganda's light heavyweight boxing champion in 1951 and held the title for 9 years straight. He was also an avid rugby player, known for bulldozing through opponents. His imposing size and brute strength made an impression, though one British officer joked that Amin was virtually bone from the neck up, implying brawn clearly outweighed brains. Still, charisma and brute force took him a long way. By 1961, despite education virtually nil, Amin's British commanders promoted him to be one of the first 2 black Ugandan officers. Uganda gained independence in 1962, and Amin's military career kept climbing. He became a close ally of Prime Minister, later President, Milton Obote, who entrusted him with key missions. Amin helped Abo quash a mutiny and even led an attack on the palace of the King of Buganda in 1966, which boosted Amin's legend among some Ugandans. Abo elevated Amin to army commander in 1965 and overall chief of the armed forces by 1970. Beneath the camaraderie, though, distrust was brewing. Rumors swirled about Amin's brutality in earlier operations, including a 1962 massacre of Kenyan tribesmen that was quietly swept under the rug. By 1970, Abo suspected Amin of misusing army funds and plotted to arrest him. Sensing danger, General Idi Amin decided to strike first, setting the stage for a coup that would put him, improbably, at the helm of Uganda. Chapter 2: Africa's Last Hope. On January 25, 1971, while President Abo was away at a conference, Idi Amin seized his moment. He launched a military coup and took control of Kampala in a near-bloodless power grab. Tanks rolled through the streets, soldiers blocked airports and roads, and Radio Uganda crackled with announcements that Abo's corrupt regime had been overthrown. Cheering crowds actually poured into the streets of the capital upon hearing the news, a testament to how unpopular Abo had become. Amin, presenting himself as a plain-spoken soldier and savior, promised this was a caretaker government only. He vowed to hold free elections as soon as the country was stable, and even promised to release political prisoners to signal a new dawn. For many Ugandans, and even some foreign observers, the coup felt like a positive change. One U.S. diplomatic report noted Ugandans were generally relieved and welcoming of Amin in those early days, hoping he would restore civilian rule and end Abo's abuses. Amin certainly saw himself as a liberator. He declared he had come to save Uganda from tyranny and frequently portrayed himself as a champion of the common man. In later propaganda, he went so far as to call himself the last king of Scotland. Yes, Scotland. More on that later. And even the last hope of Africa, positioning himself as the continent's savior. These grandiose claims weren't official titles, but they reflected Amin's growing ego. In reality, behind the celebratory facade of 1971, Amin was already moving swiftly to consolidate absolute power. Within days of the coup, he proclaimed himself president, commander-in-chief, and head of the armed forces, titles he had no intention of ever relinquishing. Uganda was now under military rule, and the man who started as a lowly bodyguard turned cook had grabbed the highest seat in the land. The question was, what kind of ruler would Idi Amin be? It wouldn't take long to find out, and the butcher of Uganda would soon reveal himself. Chapter 3: Butcher's Power Purges. Amin wasted no time shedding his benign mask. Almost immediately, he began a brutal purge of the military and anyone suspected of loyalty to ex-President Abo. Abo hailed from the Longi tribe and was supported by the Acholi people. Amin, by contrast, was from the Kakwa, a smaller Nilotic group. In his first weeks as president, Amin ordered soldiers from the Acholi and Longi ethnic groups to be rounded up. They were imprisoned. Many more were executed or disappeared. In March 1971, just 6 weeks after the coup, a horrific incident at Makindye military prison gave Ugandans a taste of the new regime's terror. 32 captured soldiers, mostly Acholi and Longi officers, were crammed into a cell and killed with a charge of dynamite, blown up en masse. Observers later estimated that in Amin's first year of rule, roughly 2/3 of the entire Ugandan army were executed, on the order of 6,000 soldiers out of 9,000. This was essentially an ethnic cleansing within the armed forces, eliminating anyone who might oppose Amin. The pattern was set for the mass bloodletting to come. The purges extended beyond soldiers. High-ranking officials who served the previous government started vanishing as well. In September 1972, Chief Justice Benedicto Kiwanaka, a former prime minister, was dragged from his chambers by Amin's henchmen and murdered. A few years later, in 1977, the Anglican Archbishop Janini Luwum, an outspoken critic of the regime, was killed under suspicious circumstances. The government absurdly claimed he died in a car accident, but it was widely understood that Amin ordered his death. Cabinet ministers, academics, journalists, no one was safe. Amin's State Research Bureau, the SRB, ostensibly an intelligence agency, became notorious for hunting down and torturing regime opponents. By late 1972, President Amin had made it clear that his earlier promises of democracy were void. He declared himself president for life, formally adopting that title in 1976, and promoted himself to field marshal. With absolute power in his grasp, Amin ruled through fear. As a U.S. State Department brief described him at the time, he was uneducated, irresponsible, paranoid, and racist, a volatile combination that Uganda was now suffering firsthand. In 1972, exiled supporters of Abo attempted a small invasion from neighboring Tanzania, hoping to topple Amin. Amin's forces repelled this attack, but it only fed his paranoia. He took revenge, not just on the rebels, but on civilians suspected of disloyalty. Entire villages in the West Nile region, Amin's home area, saw violence as the regime settled scores. By Amin's own warped logic, terror was a tool to cement his rule. A secret State Department cable from 1973 noted that an unruly army has terrorized the country, and that Amin's purge had removed nearly all soldiers who weren't from his own clique. The killings in 1971 through 72 likely claimed thousands of lives. U.S. officials estimated at least 4,000 to 5,000 tribal killings in the first year. And this was only the beginning. Amin had tasted absolute power, and he was willing to eliminate anyone to keep it. The bloodbath had begun in earnest, and ordinary Ugandans were about to learn just how terrifying life under a mad dictator could be. Chapter 4. Terror State Established. For everyday Ugandans, Idi Amin's 8-year rule wasn't just terrifying. It was a waking nightmare. People vanished without warning. Families whispered in fear, dreading the infamous late-night knock. At the center of the terror was the State Research Bureau, SRB, a plain pink building in Kampala that functioned as Amin's personal torture and execution chamber. Prisoners, often detained for no reason, were tortured, crammed 60 to a cell, and forced to live beside rotting corpses. Survivor Reverend George Nicolae described it as pure hell. Beatings from drugged guards, no food, no water. So desperate that inmates drank urine. Every day, one of those men would either die or be murdered, he recalled. Amin built an entire ecosystem of fear, stacking agencies like the Presidential Guard, military police, and SRB against each other. Everyone spied. No one felt safe. According to Amnesty International, as many as 300,000 to 500,000 Ugandans were killed, some strangled with piano wire, others shot and dumped in the Nile River. The regime didn't care who you were: rich, poor, Christian, Muslim, doctor, teacher. People were killed for their ethnicity, faith, job, or simply because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Uganda became a nation of mass graves, soaked in blood and silence. As one survivor put it, "We feared the midnight knock more than anything." Amin didn't just rule Uganda. He brutalized it. His nickname, the Butcher of Uganda, wasn't hyperbole. It was earned, horrifically. Chapter 5. Economic collapse follows. Even as he brutalized his people, Idi Amin also wrecked Uganda's economy, and nothing did more damage than the mass expulsion of Uganda's Asian minority in August 1972. Overnight, around 50,000 to 60,000 South Asians, many of whose family had lived in Uganda for generations, were given 90 days to leave the country. Their only crime? Being successful. Amin claimed the expulsion came to him in a prophetic dream. These Asians ran much of Uganda's economy, including banks, pharmacies, shops, and factories. When they were forced out, Amin handed their businesses to loyalists and soldiers, many of whom had zero experience. Chaos followed. One example, a cement plant collapsed, literally, because the new managers didn't know how to clean the filters. Production across industries plummeted. Between 1970 and 1978, Uganda's export crops, like coffee and cotton, fell over 50%, and industrial output followed. Inflation exploded to nearly 200% per year, and basic goods became unaffordable. Sugar hit $5 per pound. Gasoline soared to $39 per gallon, while the average civil servant made just $30 a month. With reserves gone, Amin simply printed money, worsening inflation. Corruption was out of control. His cronies looted the treasury, even flying abroad with suitcases full of cash. To survive, desperate citizens smuggled goods and coffee, only to face Amin's so-called anti-corruption squad, which extorted or killed them. By the late 70s, Uganda's economy was a disaster zone. Hospitals, schools, and roads collapsed. Even Amin's own officials admitted the Asian expulsion was catastrophic. But Amin? He lived lavishly, while Uganda crumbled. Chapter 6. The Delusional Butcher. By the mid-1970s, Idi Amin's rule had descended into a grotesque blend of absurdity and horror. He built a cult of personality, granting himself wild titles like Conqueror of the British Empire, after the UK cut ties with Uganda. His full honorific, yes, read on state radio, included phrases like Lord of all the beasts of the earth and fishes of the sea. Fake medals adorned his uniform, and he delighted in ridiculous displays of power, like hijacking the police band's baton to play conductor. But behind the clownish theater was chilling violence. Rumors swirled that Amin was a cannibal, and his own aides later claimed he kept severed heads in his fridge. One of his wives was found dismembered, allegedly on his orders. Most shockingly, Amin once openly bragged in an interview, "I have eaten human meat. It's very salty." Delusions of grandeur extended beyond Uganda. A Muslim convert, Amin dreamed of leading the Islamic world, aligning with Libya's Gaddafi, and denouncing Israel and Britain. He chaired the Organization of African Unity in 1975 through 76, but was widely mocked. In a 1976 telegram, he praised Hitler for the Holocaust, triggering global outrage and confirming his international pariah status. At home, Amin surrounded himself with loyal death squads and ruled through fear. He had 6 wives and fathered over 30 children, often marrying across tribes to appear inclusive, while killing indiscriminately. By 1977, even his allies were disillusioned. The economy was shattered, the army terrified, and Amin, Uganda's self-proclaimed Big Daddy, was spiraling fast towards collapse. Chapter 7. Hostages, Heroes, and Humiliation. In June 1976, Idi Amin made a move that would shatter his global image. An Air France flight from Tel Aviv to Paris was hijacked by 4 terrorists, 2 German, 2 Palestinian, and rerouted to Entebbe Airport in Uganda. Amin welcomed the hijackers, gave them Ugandan troops for backup, and posed as a mediator while colluding behind the scenes. He released some passengers, but held on to the Jewish and Israeli hostages, threatening their lives. Then on July 4th, Israel pulled off Operation Entebbe, a jaw-dropping rescue mission. Israeli commandos flew 2,500 miles, stormed the airport, killed the hijackers and about 20 Ugandan soldiers, and rescued 102 out of the 106 hostages in under 90 minutes. The only Israeli casualty was Yonatan Netanyahu, the mission commander. Amin was humiliated. In a fit of rage, he ordered the murder of Dora Bloch, a 74-year-old hostage recovering in the Kampala hospital. She was dragged from her bed and killed. Hospital staff who tried to protect her were also executed. Her charred remains were later found buried on a plantation. The world was horrified. Britain immediately cut all ties with Uganda. Amin responded by awarding himself the absurd title Conqueror of the British Empire. But the damage was done. International sympathy vanished, and even Arab allies backed away. The Entebbe raid not only exposed Amin as weak and foolish, but it also shook his own military. His aura of invincibility cracked. As one observer put it, Entebbe showed Idi Amin was not invulnerable, and he couldn't stand that. Chapter 8. Tanzania War and Overthrow. Want to understand the world better? Start with history and subscribe to our channel. By 1978, Uganda was collapsing. Amin's army was demoralized, and many soldiers had fled, often to Tanzania, ruled by his fiercest critic, President Julius Nyerere. With the economy in ruins and international aid dried up, Amin made a disastrous move. He invaded Tanzania. In October 1978, he claimed that Tanzania's Kagera salient belonged to Uganda and sent troops to loot and occupy the region. But Amin underestimated Nyerere. Tanzania launched a counteroffensive, joined by thousands of Ugandan exiles. Amin's poorly trained army crumbled. By April 1979, Tanzanian tanks rolled into Kampala. Amin fled by helicopter, first to Libya, then to Saudi Arabia, where he was granted exile on the condition that he remain politically silent. The Libyan troops sent by Muammar Gaddafi didn't fare any better. 400 were killed. As the capital fell, Colonel Oyayi Ojak, a Ugandan rebel commander, symbolically led the charge to retake the city. On April 13, 1979, Ugandans celebrated the end of Idi Amin's brutal 8-year reign. In Saudi Arabia, Amin lived a quiet life in Jeddah, with a villa, a generous stipend, and zero accountability. He never expressed remorse, reportedly spending his days fishing, lifting weights, and spinning tales, still wearing his old military beret as if nothing had changed. Back in Uganda, the scale of destruction was jaw-dropping. Mass graves, millions in debt, and just $200,000 left in the treasury. Nyerere quipped that Amin had driven Uganda's bus off a cliff. Now it was up to Ugandans to pull it back up. Amin escaped justice, but his legacy left an entire nation traumatized and struggling to rebuild. Chapter 9. Death, Exile, and Putrid Legacy. Idi Amin died in exile in Saudi Arabia on August 16, 2003, nearly 24 years after fleeing Uganda. Despite overseeing one of the most brutal regimes of the 20th century, he never faced trial for the 300,000 to 500,000 deaths linked to his rule. He spent his final years fishing, working out, and spinning tales of his former glory. insisting he would only return to Uganda as president. He never did. Amin died quietly of multiple organ failure in Jeddah at around age 78. His burial was low-key, attended by a small handful of relatives. Uganda's then president, Yoweri Museveni, considered repatriating his body, but ultimately left him buried in exile. For many Ugandans, his death brought relief. A grim chapter finally closed. But there was also frustration that he had escaped justice, dying in comfort, while so many had suffered. Survivors and human rights groups had spent years collecting testimonies of Amin's crimes. The brutality was beyond dispute, and yet a small fringe of Ugandans expressed nostalgia, praising Amin for things like restoring pride or expelling Asians, sentiments largely dismissed as historical amnesia. His legacy remains one of national trauma. Uganda, already fragile in the 1970s, was left in ruins by his rule. It took decades of leadership under Museveni to begin healing and rebuilding. To this day, Ugandan schoolchildren learn about Amin's atrocities, and a Human Rights Commission helps document the pain he inflicted. Globally, Amin is grouped with history's worst tyrants: Hitler, Stalin, and Pol Pot. His story is told in books, documentaries, and Hollywood, most famously in The Last King of Scotland. But beyond the theatrics and cruelty, his reign serves as a warning: how power, unchecked, can transform a man into a monster and a nation into a graveyard. If Idi Amin had faced trial like other war criminals, would the world remember him differently? Or do some dictators get off too easy simply because they die in exile? Let us know in the comments below. Here's another video history buffs enjoyed watching. Goodbye for now.
Tim, as we see these pictures, the other elements, of course, are the rusty old railings, the unpainted concrete.
These were Saddam Hussein's last moments on Earth. He was the man behind Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, but taking him down was more than difficult.
Went north and took the capital of Baghdad. Next, they had to find Iraq's brutal dictator, Saddam Hussein, and disarm him of his weapons of mass destruction.
While the British took Basra, the Americans journeyed north to take Baghdad, the capital of Iraq. And only after all of this did they have to find Iraq's brutal dictator if they ever hoped to disarm the weapons of mass destruction. But there was one major problem. Even after all this bloodshed, they didn't find any weapons of mass destruction. So what was the point of this war? Let's discuss it in today's episode of Light's History. Chapter 1: Battle Backstory. In late 2002, America stood under the long shadow of 9/11, and the Bush administration declared Iraq its next axis of evil, lumping Saddam Hussein's regime in with Iran and North Korea.
These regimes pose a grave and growing danger.
In his 2002 State of the Union address, President Bush warned of grave and growing danger from nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons, saying he would not wait on events while dangers gather.
I will not wait on events while dangers gather. I will not stand by as peril draws closer and closer.
Behind this rhetoric lay intelligence reports hinting at Iraq hiding documents and materials from UN inspectors, though later investigations cast doubt on how definitive that evidence was. By November 2002, the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 1441, offering Iraq a final opportunity to comply with disarmament. The resolution warned of serious consequences, but stopped short of authorizing military action. Meanwhile, U.S. diplomat Colin Powell, before the Security Council on February 5, 2003, claimed Saddam was working to acquire nuclear-capable components, a key moment in building public support for military action. Yet the world pushed back hard. Between January and April 2003, around 36 million people participated in nearly 3,000 anti-war protests globally. The biggest single day was February 15, 2003, when between 6 and 10 million demonstrators rallied in over 600 cities across some 60 countries. Rome hosted the largest gathering, with about 3 million people marching under the slogan, "Stop the war, no ifs or buts." A turnout so huge the Guinness Book of World Records declared it the largest anti-war rally in history. London and Madrid each saw between 1 and 2 million protesters, while cities like Berlin drew 300,000 to 500,000. Even in McMurdo Station, Antarctica, scientists held a remote peace vigil. Despite the enormous public outcry, the US, UK, Australia, and Poland formed a coalition of the willing and pressed ahead. France, Germany, Russia, and others in the UN vocally opposed the invasion, but without a new UN mandate, voices of dissent fell silent as the coalition began its preparations. This clash of forces set the stage. On one side, a cadre of Western leaders warning the world of an imminent mushroom cloud, backed by intelligence they described as conclusive. On the other, a world massed in protest, united in disbelief that war, something so final, could be justified on such contested grounds. It was against this fraught, polarized backdrop that in March 2003, the US launched Operation Iraqi Freedom, and in just 5 days, toppled a dictator whose regime had defined a nation for decades. Before we move on to the next section, please don't forget to subscribe if you liked the video so far. Chapter 2, Operation Iraqi Freedom.
Are now past diplomacy. Various Special Forces teams and the CIA's Special Activities Division begin their own infiltrations across the Iraqi border, awaiting the beginning.
On the night of March 20th, 2003, the US and its allies launched the opening salvo of Operation Iraqi Freedom, calling their strategy shock and awe. At about 2:30 UTC, the skies over Baghdad erupted.
By approximately 40 Tomahawk cruise missiles from US Navy battle groups in the Persian Gulf and a submarine in the Red Sea.
The US Navy and Air Force unleashed roughly 36 Tomahawk cruise missiles, combined with 2 F-117 stealth aircraft, dropping massive GBU-27 bunker busters near suspected regime bunkers, even though later reports revealed that the targeted bunker didn't exist. Moments later, a tidal wave of airstrikes ripped through government command centers, security infrastructure, communication hubs, and air defenses throughout the city. In total, over 1,700 air sorties were flown in the first phase, including 504 cruise missile strikes, designed to paralyze Iraq's leadership and sabotage military response. The spectacle was brutal and precise. Night vision footage showed towers of smoke and flashes of burnt pink clouds rising above Baghdad, a surreal image broadcast live around the world. By dawn, elite US ground forces had begun their push. Special operators, paratroopers, and armored brigades surged from the desert, securing key border crossings, airports, and highway junctions. Within 5 days, the coalition force comprised some 160,000 troops, around 130,000 American, 45,000 British, and additional units from Australia and Poland. These units raced northward and westward, encircling cities like Basra, Mosul, and Tikrit, dismantling Iraqi command posts and isolating regime strongholds. The idea behind shock and awe was simple: strike so hard and fast that the enemy crumbles mentally and physically. As Harlan Ullman, the doctrine's founder, predicted, in 2, 3, 4, 5 days, Iraq is physically, emotionally, and psychologically exhausted. The numbers bear that out. By April, the Iraq Body Count Project reported around 6,700 civilian deaths during the invasion phase, a tragic testament to the campaign's ferocity. Despite the rapid dominance, pockets of Iraqi forces fought back. In Basra, precision strikes mistakenly hit civilian areas, claiming dozens of lives, including one notable attack on a family home on April 5th. Yet overall resistance collapsed quickly. On April 5th, US forces carried out the famed Thunder Run, a decisive armored incursion into Baghdad that pierced the city's defenses and essentially ended organized resistance. Within 5 days, Baghdad was encircled, and government command was in disarray. The dictator's rule, built over decades, came crashing down under a combination of devastating air power and lightning-fast ground advances. Operation Shock and Awe demonstrated the raw might of modern precision warfare and began a controversial chapter in history, whose consequences would echo for years. Chapter 3: The Fall of Baghdad.
before they slip away into the darkness. They have suffered only 1 wounded and no fatalities. Many Republican Guardsmen have been killed.
On April 9, 2003, after just 3 weeks of US-led operations, American troops entered central Baghdad. Saddam Hussein's regime collapsed almost instantly. In one of the most iconic images of the war, Marines and Iraqi civilians pulled down a 12-meter-tall statue of Saddam in Firdos Square using a US recovery vehicle. The moment, broadcast worldwide, became the symbolic end of his dictatorship. The Battle of Baghdad had seen around 30,000 coalition troops confront 45,000 Iraqi defenders. By the time US forces reached the city center, resistance had mostly collapsed. Marines reported little enemy fire and surreal encounters with locals who offered tea and thanks. But the city was unraveling. Sabotaged oil fields burned, black smoke filled the sky, and looters ransacked government buildings, museums, and even the Baghdad Zoo, where over 95% of animals died amid the chaos. Scenes of cheering Iraqis grabbing gold, medicine, and priceless artifacts filled TV screens. Hours after the fall, General Tommy Franks declared major combat over. On May 1st, President George W. Bush stood under a mission accomplished banner aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln and announced the end of major operations. At that moment, 104 US troops had died. Thousands more would follow. The fall of Baghdad was swift and dramatic, but it was not the end. The images of victory masked a deeper instability. With Saddam gone, Iraq spiraled into insurgency, sectarian violence, and years of bloody conflict. The mission, it turned out, was far from accomplished. Want to understand the world better? Start with history and subscribe to our channel. Chapter 4: Hunt for Hussein. After the fall of Baghdad in April 2003, Saddam Hussein disappeared into the deserts of Salah al-Din province with a few loyal followers. The US immediately launched one of the largest manhunts in modern history, naming him High-Value Target Number 1. Special Operations Forces, including Task Force 121, conducted over 600 missions and nearly 300 interrogations between July and December 2003, offering a $25 million reward for Saddam and another $30 million for his sons Uday and Qusay. On July 22, 2003, US troops located the two sons in a safe house in Mosul. After a 4-hour battle involving more than 240 soldiers, heavy weapons, and air support, both were killed along with Qusay's teenage son and a bodyguard. Their deaths shattered the last remnants of Saddam's core circle. The decisive moment came on December 13, 2003. In Operation Red Dawn, US forces found Saddam hiding in a small underground bunker, dubbed the Spider Hole, just outside Tikrit. He surrendered without resistance, armed with only a pistol. Coalition Administrator L. Paul Bremer made the famous announcement, "Ladies and gentlemen, we got him." Saddam was later tried by the Iraqi Special Tribunal for crimes against humanity, particularly for the 1982 Dujail massacre of 148 Shiite civilians. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. On December 30, 2006, Saddam was hanged at Camp Justice in Baghdad. His body was buried near his hometown alongside his sons. His execution marked the brutal end of a dictator, but it also ushered in a new era of chaos as Iraq spiraled into insurgency, sectarian warfare, and long-term instability that would haunt the region for years to come. But what do you think? Did executing Saddam Hussein truly bring justice to Iraq, or did it open the gates to even more bloodshed, instability, and extremism that still haunts the region today? Let us know in the comments below. Here's another video history buffs enjoyed watching. Bye for now.
Thousands of prisoners learned that their doctor didn't wear blood on his coat by accident. He put it there himself. Out of 3,000 twins experimented on in Auschwitz, only about 200 survived. And the man behind that number wasn't a soldier or a general. He was a doctor with a medical degree and a smile. Today, we're going to look at how one man's obsession with genetics became a death sentence for over 90% of his subjects, and why his victims' voices still shake the world decades later. Chapter 1. Mad Scientist. Picture the chaos of Auschwitz arrival ramp in 1944. Frightened families, Nazi guards barking orders, and a doctor calmly pointing left or right, deciding who lives and who dies. That man was Dr. Josef Mengele, a name now synonymous with inhumane medical horror. Mengele became the most notorious of Auschwitz doctors, so feared that prisoners nicknamed him the Angel of Death. As one survivor recalled, "We feared these visits more than anything. We never knew whether we would be permitted to live. He was free to do whatever he pleased with us." Mengele's presence on the selection ramp, often with a chilling smile or a jaunty whistle, made him a symbol of Nazi cruelty. He would flick his gloved hand, sending the majority, women with children, the elderly, anyone deemed unfit, straight to the gas chambers, while a minority were spared for slave labor or his own gruesome experiments. In these moments, the 32-year-old SS doctor sealed the fate of countless innocents. Mengele personally oversaw selections and even supervised gas chamber operations at Birkenau's crematoria 4 and 5, all with an air of twisted enthusiasm that set him apart even from other camp doctors. It's no wonder that his very appearance struck terror into prisoners. He truly earned the moniker Angel of Death. But Mengele's story is not just about an evil grin on a ramp. It's about a qualified physician turned mad scientist. How does a well-educated man become the butcher of Auschwitz? To answer that, we'll dig into his background, his pseudo-scientific obsessions, the sadistic experiments that made him infamous, and the legacy of trauma he left behind. Before we move on to the next section, please don't forget to subscribe if you've liked the video so far. Chapter 2. PhD to SS Butcher. It's hard to believe, but the Angel of Death started as an ordinary student. Josef Mengele was born on March 16, 1911, in Günzburg, Germany, the eldest son of a wealthy industrial family. He was bright, ambitious, and by 1935, he earned a PhD in physical anthropology from the University of Munich, and in 1936, a medical degree. In fact, Mengele was not some quack in a uniform. He was a highly trained physician and researcher, which makes his descent into monstrosity even more disturbing. As a young scientist, he worked under Dr. Ottmar von Fuscher, a leading geneticist with a fascination for twins. Under Fuscher's mentorship at the Frankfurt Institute for Hereditary Biology, Mengele became steeped in Nazi racial science, the toxic belief that Aryan Germans were biologically superior and that traits like disease or even criminal behavior were genetic and had to be eliminated. This wasn't fringe stuff in Nazi Germany. It was mainstream science used to justify forced sterilizations, racial laws, and eventually genocide. Mengele eagerly embraced these ideas. In 1937, he joined the Nazi Party's paramilitaries, and by 1938, formally became a member of the SS, Schutzstaffel. He wasn't initially an ardent Nazi before Hitler, but once the Nazis were in power, he hitched himself to their racist ideology and biomedical agendas. During World War II, Mengele served as an SS medical officer on the Eastern Front, where he reportedly showed bravery under fire. He earned the Iron Cross First Class for saving German lives. An injury sent him back from the front in early 1943. With his background and connections, Mengele then requested a posting to Auschwitz, likely seeing an opportunity to advance his research on human subjects. His transfer was approved, and in May 1943, the 32-year-old arrived at Auschwitz-Birkenau, the Nazis' largest death camp. He came with a promotion to SS Hauptsturmführer, captain, and an aura of prestige. Colleagues noted he was handsome, immaculately groomed, and wore his uniform with an almost aristocratic flair. Dr. Edward Wirths, the chief camp physician, appointed Mengele as the lead doctor of the gypsy camp, Ziegunterlager, in Birkenau. It was an assignment that gave Mengele free rein to indulge his scientific curiosity and his cruelty. By all accounts, he relished it. Unlike other SS doctors who found the mass murder duties unpleasant, Mengele undertook his task with a flamboyant air, as one historian put it. In short order, he would turn Auschwitz into his personal laboratory of horrors. Chapter 3. Playground of Horror. At Auschwitz, Dr. Mengele's responsibility went far beyond normal medicine. In fact, SS doctors at the camp rarely treated patients at all. Their job was to implement the Nazi extermination policies in a medical guise. Mengele threw himself into this role. He was often front and center on the train unloading ramp, performing the dreaded selection of incoming Jews. As trains arrived packed with thousands of deportees, Mengele, riding crop in hand and boots polished to a shine, would inspect the bedraggled masses. With a flick of his finger, he sent the vast majority, including nearly all children, mothers with kids, the elderly, and infirm, to the left, straight to the gas chambers. A smaller number of able-bodied adults were motioned to the right, destined for forced labor. Children clinging to parents were wrenched away. Twins, or people with unusual features, caught Mengele's eye and were set aside for his experiments. Survivor testimonies describe him as eerily cheerful during selections, sometimes humming or smiling while sending families to their deaths. It's a grotesque image, a well-dressed doctor acting like a macabre conductor, directing human traffic to life or death. For those selected as his experimental subjects, being on Mengele's list meant a temporary reprieve from death. Being on Mengele's list was better than being on no list, recalled survivor Eva Moses-Kor, but it came at a terrible price. Mengele's patients were not patients at all. They were prisoners used as guinea pigs. As part of camp duty, he also did rounds in the inmate infirmary, where he would order any prisoner not recovered in 2 weeks to be gassed. In one instance, when a typhus epidemic broke out in the women's barracks, Mengele's solution was as cold-blooded as it gets. He cleared one entire block of 600 sick Jewish women and sent them all to the gas chambers. Then he had the barracks disinfected and brought in the next group of prisoners, whom he would again kill if they showed signs of disease. He repeated this process for later outbreaks of scarlet fever, etc., routinely murdering the infected as a form of disease control. For this achievement, Mengele was actually awarded the War Merit Cross, and in 1944 promoted to first physician of the Birkenau camp. By late 1944, as Auschwitz death factory roared at full capacity, the mass gassing of Hungary's Jews, among others, Mengele was at the peak of his influence in the camp. He had a research agenda, ample victims, and no scruples. Few escaped his chamber of horrors and lived to tell the tale. Chapter 4. Menu of Torture. Want to understand the world better? Start with history and subscribe to our channel. If Auschwitz was hell, then Josef Mengele's corner of it was the research wing of the underworld, a place where curiosity and cruelty were inseparable. His most infamous obsession? Twins. To Mengele and his mentor, Ottmar von Verschuer, identical twins were like a gift from nature, a perfect way to separate heredity from environment. In Nazi racial science, in Auschwitz, he suddenly had more subjects than any scientist could dream of because he made sure of it. At the unloading ramp, he'd stride down the line, calling "Zwingli, twins," and pluck them from the chaos. Parents were almost always sent to the gas chambers. The twins were herded into special barracks, reserved for Mengele's experiments. By 1944, he'd collected about 1,500 pairs, over 3,000 children. What followed was not research, but a catalog of horrors. Twins endured endless nude measurements, photographs, and medical exams that went on for hours. One twin might be infected, injected, or operated on, while the other served as a control. If one died, Mengele would kill the other, often with a phenol injection to the heart, so he could dissect both and compare organs. Some procedures defied belief. Survivor Vera Alexander testified that she saw Mengele sew 2 gypsy children together back to back in a crude attempt to create conjoined twins. Their wounds festered. They died in agony. Children had blood transfusions from each other, mysterious injections that triggered fevers and swelling, and even forced inseminations. Mengele was fascinated by eye color, especially heterochromia, and injected chemicals directly into eyes in failed attempts to turn brown eyes blue. The results were predictable: infections, blindness, unbearable pain. Victims with unusual eyes were killed so their eyeballs could be shipped to Berlin for analysis. Eva Moses-Kor 10 years old, remembered 3 days a week of observation and 3 of injections. One round left her with such high fever and swelling that Mengele himself predicted she'd be dead in 2 weeks. She swore she'd prove him wrong, and she did, barely. Out of those 3,000 twins, only about 200 survived by liberation in January 1945. But twins weren't his only fixation. Mengele had a macabre interest in any physical anomaly: dwarfs, unusual proportions, genetic deformities. The most famous case was the Ovitz family, a troupe of Jewish Romanian dwarf entertainers. He fed and clothed them better than average prisoners, solely to keep them alive for repeated blood draws, x-rays, dental extractions, and drug tests. Once done, many were killed and their skeletons sent to Berlin. Pregnant women were another target. Witnesses said Mengele would pull them from the general population for exams, then send them straight to the gas chambers. Both mother and unborn child dissected afterward. Prisoners with heterochromia suffered the same fate as their eye color subjects. He also participated in experiments that sound like a twisted checklist. The first were mass sterilization trials, where they were using radiation or chemical injections, deliberate infection with typhus or tuberculosis to test treatments, unnecessary amputations and wound infliction studies, vivisections, where they were cutting open living prisoners without anesthesia, as survivor Alex Deckel testified. One victim, Yitzhak Ganin, had a kidney removed by Mengele without anesthesia. Afterward, he was forced to clean the operating room. In 1943, when Noma, a gangrenous disease, hit Roma children in the camp, Mengele treated it as a research opportunity, killing several to send their preserved heads and organs to SS labs. Even those cured by prisoner doctors were later gassed. What's chilling is that Mengele didn't see himself as a madman. He thought he was a pioneer. He sent specimens and detailed reports back to Berlin, and the German Research Foundation even funded a pathology lab for him in Auschwitz. He imagined publishing his work and becoming a respected academic after a war. In reality, his findings were scientifically worthless, built on torture, murder, and the complete abandonment of medical ethics. And yet, in Auschwitz, no one stopped him. As long as he advanced the SS extermination mission, the screams from his lab were just background noise. For his victims, though, those screams in the face of the man who caused them would never fade, even as the Nazis began losing the war. Chapter 5: Escaping Trial and Evading Justice. When the Soviets closed in on Auschwitz in January 1945, Josef Mengele didn't stick around for liberation. On January 17th, he slipped out with retreating SS troops, hauling boxes of experiment records like a twisted academic on the run. Weeks later, in a surreal twist, he was actually captured by the Americans, but they didn't recognize him. Under the fake name Fritz Holman, he passed as just another German soldier. By August 1945, the Angel of Death was free, hiding in plain sight. From 1945 to 1949, Mengele lived quietly in Bavaria, working as a farmhand, while the Nuremberg trials exposed Nazi medical crimes. Witnesses began naming him. The US and Soviets put him on wanted lists, and his wealthy family even faked reports of his death to throw off investigators. But by mid-1949, Germany was too hot. With money and forged papers from his family, Mengele slipped over the Alps to Italy and caught a ship to Argentina under the name Helmut Greger. Life in South America was shockingly comfortable. In Argentina, he even lived under his real name for a while, securing citizenship in 1956 as Jose Mengele. But when Nazi hunters closed in, especially after Adolf Eichmann's dramatic capture in Buenos Aires, Mengele bolted. Paraguay in 1959, Brazil in 1960. There, using aliases like Wolfgang Gerhard, he hid among pro-Nazi expatriates with quiet financial help from home. By the 1960s, the Mossad, West German police, and Nazi hunter Simon Wiesenthal were on his trail. Leads fizzled, sightings were false, and Mengele always stayed a step ahead. He died a free man in 1979, drowning after a stroke while swimming in Brazil. Buried under a fake name, his identity wasn't confirmed until 1985. For 40 years, the world chased him. He never stood trial. Justice never caught up. But the memories of his victims have ensured history never forgets, especially not the victims who survived and lived to tell the tale. Chapter 6: Surviving the Unimaginable. If you really want to understand the Angel of Death, You have to hear it from the people who faced him, not in a courtroom, but in his lab. 2 survivors, worlds apart in age and background, lived through Mengele's science and carried the scars for life. Ava Moses Kaur was just 10 when she and her twin sister, Miriam, stepped off a cattle car in Auschwitz in 1944. An SS guard spotted them. Twins! And within seconds, they were torn from their mother, never to see their family again. Their luck was being handed to Josef Mengele for twin experiments. Being on Mengele's list was better than being on no list, Ava later said, because it meant you might survive a little longer. Life as a twin guinea pig was split into 2 routines. 3 days a week, they were paraded naked in an observation lab, poked, measured, photographed. Unbelievably demeaning, Ava recalled. The other days were worse. Blood drawn from one arm, mysterious injections in the other. One round of shots left Ava with a raging fever, swelling, and red spots. Mengele himself came to see her, and smirking told staff, "Too bad she's so young. She only has 2 weeks to live." Lying on a straw mat, Ava made a vow. I will prove him wrong. 2 weeks later, she did, barely. When the Soviets liberated Auschwitz in January 1945, she and Miriam were among only about 200 surviving twins out of 3,000. Ava spent decades tracking other twins, founding candles, children of Auschwitz Nazi deadly lab experiments survivors. She shocked many by forgiving Mengele, not because he deserved it, but as she said, because I deserve peace. She died in 2019 at 85, still telling her story. While Ava was a child in Mengele's care, Yitzhak Ganin was a 20-year-old Greek Jew from Salonika, deported in 1944. His family was gassed on arrival. Yitzhak was selected for labor, but soon caught Mengele's eye. One day, in the camp hospital, Mengele cut into him without anesthesia. The pain was indescribable, Ganin said. Then came the moment burned into his memory. I saw my kidney pulsating in his hand. I cried like a madman. There was no pain relief, only orders to clean the bloody operating room afterward. 6 months later came another experiment, immersion in freezing water, while Mengele recorded his body's reaction. Eventually weakened and no longer useful, Ganin was sent to the gas chamber line, number 201. The chamber fit 200. That fluke saved his life. After liberation, Ganin moved to Israel and avoided doctors for 64 years. Only when he collapsed from heart failure in 2009 did surgeons discover he had one kidney. I know, he told them. The last time I saw the other one, it was in Josef Mengele's hand. These 2 stories, one of a child who fought to live, one of a young man who stayed silent for decades, strip away any illusion that Mengele was just following orders or doing research. They show the angel of death up close, smirking over a sick child, casually holding a man's kidney, reducing human beings to disposable lab tools. And they reminded us that survival wasn't just about liberation. It was about living with those memories for the rest of your life. Chapter 7. Stain on the World. Josef Mengele remains the ultimate symbol of medicine gone rotten, proof that a doctor's oath can be twisted into a license to kill. Unlike many Nazi perpetrators, he never faced a court. The outrage over his crimes directly shaped the 1947 Nuremberg Code, setting global standards for informed consent and humane research, a grim silver lining to the horrors of freezing experiments, twin studies, and surgical torture. Post-war justice? A mess. West Germany, Israel, and Nazi hunters pursued him for decades, but Cold War politics and dead ends let him slip away. When Brazil confirmed his death in 1985, there was relief that the chase was over, but fury that he'd lived freely for 34 years. That same year, a mock trial in Jerusalem gathered over 100 survivors. They told the world about sterilizations, dissections, and twins sewn together, testimonies that convicted him in history's eyes. Poetic twist. His skeleton now sits in a Sao Paulo forensic museum, teaching medical students what never to do. His son Rolf met him in 1977 and found a man without a shred of remorse. Mengele claimed he'd never harmed anyone, and even said twins owed their lives to me. Survivors carried lifelong wounds, infertility, chronic pain, and trauma, but many, like Ava Kor, turned pain into activism. As Renee Firestone put it, "We are living proof of his failure." Mengele wanted them erased. Instead, their stories outlive him. Today, his name remains shorthand for the evil doctor, a cautionary tale taught in every medical school, and the cry of never again still echoes with the weight of real, lived horror. If Josef Mengele had been captured alive, do you think the world would remember him differently? Or would the horrors he committed still overshadow any trial he could have faced? Let us know in the comments below. Here's another video history buffs enjoyed watching. Goodbye for now. If you could see the gun a leader kept closest to them, would you know what kind of ruler they were? Would Washington's elegant flintlocks tell you that he was a gentleman warrior? Would Hitler's gold-plated Walter scream vanity over function? And what about the ones who kept their guns hidden? What were they afraid you'd see? The stories behind these weapons might tell you more about their owners than any speech they ever gave. So let's dive right in. Chapter 1. Donald Trump. The 45th U.S. president is known as a brash businessman, and he's also one of the few modern presidents to boast about packing heat. Trump once revealed he had a rare New York City concealed carry permit, and he wasn't shy about owning firearms. "I own a couple of different guns, but I don't talk about it," he said in one interview. We do know he kept at least 2 handguns in his collection, a .45 caliber Heckler & Koch pistol and a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver. In true Trump fashion, he hinted he carried them for self-defense before his presidency. During the 2016 campaign, Trump even mused about buying a Glock at an event, causing a stir until his staff clarified he didn't actually purchase it. While there aren't many photos of Trump shooting, he mostly leaves the hunting to his sons. He has styled himself as a Second Amendment champion. He once quipped that he could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody without losing voters. A dark joke, perhaps, but it underscored his braggadocious tough guy image. Chapter 2. Vladimir Putin. Russia's long-running president has carefully crafted a macho image, and guns are a big part of it. Putin is often photographed handling firearms, from tranquilizer dart guns to advanced sniper rifles. In 2018, he donned ear protectors and fired a brand new Kalashnikov SVCH 308 sniper rifle, reportedly hitting 3 out of 5 targets. Russian media gushed he handled the rifle like a professional, holding his breath between heartbeats as he squeezed the trigger. In one famous photo op, Putin stalked through Siberia's wilderness with a hunting rifle in hand, showing off his outdoorsman credentials. Guns have even become diplomatic gifts for him. In 2023, North Korea's Kim Jong-un presented Putin with a North Korean-made rifle, while Putin gave Kim a high-quality Russian rifle in return. Before we move on to the next section, please don't forget to subscribe if you've liked the video so far. Chapter 3. Napoleon Bonaparte. The French emperor of the early 1800s lived in an era of muskets and sabers. Yet Napoleon's personal firearms became legendary. He owned exquisite pairs of flintlock pistols, including a beautifully decorated set made in 1775 by gunmaker Boutet of Versailles, which he fondly called Mes pistolets de Versailles. Napoleon kept those pistols at his side, even during exile on St. Helena, and bequeathed them to his son in his will. Another pair of pistols, crafted by Gasset, almost altered history. In 1814, after a crushing defeat, Napoleon tried to use them to commit suicide. His loyal aide, General Caulaincourt, secretly dumped out the gunpowder, foiling the attempt. Napoleon survived thanks to poison and a strong stomach, and he later gave those pistols to Caulaincourt in gratitude. These very guns, engraved with his image and inlaid with gold, still exist. They sold at a French auction in 2024 for around $1.8 million. Chapter 4. Winston Churchill. Britain's bulldog had a lifelong affection for firearms. As a young army officer, Churchill eagerly carried a .455 Webley revolver on the Afghan frontier in the 1890s, and later armed himself with not one, but two semi-automatic Mauser C96 pistols during campaigns in Sudan and South Africa. Fast forward to World War II, Churchill was rarely far from a gun. He had a Colt 1911 .45 caliber pistol, personally engraved with Winston Spencer Churchill, that he bought in 1915 and loved to use for target practice. And who can forget the famous photograph of Churchill grinning like a gangster with a Thompson submachine gun, a Tommy gun, in 1940, dressed in a coat and fedora, brandishing the Thompson with a drum magazine. He looked ready for a mobster film, a propaganda image that so irked the Nazis they used it to claim Churchill was a criminal. He also test-fired Sten guns and M1 carbines alongside Allied troops. Churchill's arsenal was vast. Presentation rifles, like a Canadian Ross rifle gifted in 1914, multiple hunting shotguns, and an array of pistols he acquired over decades. He once received a Webley semi-auto pistol as a thank you after a 1911 gunfight with anarchists, quipping in his thank you note that had it arrived one day earlier, it might have gone into action. Chapter 5. Joseph Stalin. Unlike some revolutionaries, Stalin wasn't often photographed waving guns, but behind the scenes, he appreciated the symbolic value of a good firearm. In the late 1940s, the Soviet dictator was presented with a brand new sidearm to mark his 70th birthday, a Makarov 9x18mm semi-automatic pistol, the USSR's latest design. Engraved on the barrel were the words, "To Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin, for 70th birthday, from Tula Gunmakers," commemorating the gift from the famed Tula Arms Factory in 1949. This was a cutting-edge pistol at the time. The Makarov was adopted by Soviet forces in 1951, replacing the old Tokarev. Stalin also received other embellished weapons. One known token is a 6.35mm Korovin TK pistol presented by workers of Tula, essentially a fancy little pocket pistol. There are even exhibition pieces, like a custom birthday TT-33 pistol, though those were likely display only. In his earlier years, as a Bolshevik gangster, Stalin certainly used guns during bank robberies and the Civil War, but those were standard issue rifles and revolvers, not gold-plated souvenirs. One thing Stalin did do was distribute ornate firearms as political gifts. He understood the propaganda of firepower. For instance, in 1943, he reportedly awarded shiny pistols to Soviet tank aces and presented engraved guns to allies. Ironically, despite the millions of guns under his command, Stalin's own end came not by the gun, but by a cerebral hemorrhage. Chapter 6. Adolf Hitler. Hitler's relationships with guns was as twisted as his legacy. Though not a soldier known for marksmanship, he surrounded himself with firearms, including one literally fit for a Bond villain. For his 50th birthday in 1939, Hitler was gifted a gold-plated Walther PP pistol, lavishly engraved with floral scrollwork and inlaid with his initials AH on ivory grips. This golden gun was a personal present from the Walther Company to their best, albeit evil, customer. After all, Hitler's military was standardizing Walther pistols for officers. The Golden Walther became legendary. Discovered in his Munich apartment in 1945, it later vanished into private collections, fetching over $100,000 by the 1980s. But when it came time for Hitler's final moment in the bunker, it wasn't the gold PP he grabbed. On April 30th, 1945, as Soviet troops closed in, Hitler shot himself with a regular Walther PPK pistol in 7.65 millimeter. Ever the underachiever, he also bit down on a cyanide capsule, belt, and suspenders. Interestingly, Hitler owned several Walther PPKs, so the exact one used remains unknown. None of his personal guns were enough to turn the tide of war, but they became prized trophies afterward. U.S. soldiers looted many of his firearms, a Walther shotgun from his Eagle's Nest, his personal hunting rifles, etc. Hitler wasn't often photographed brandishing weapons. He preferred giving orders to firing shots. But he did carry a pistol during World War I as a Bavarian soldier. Ironically, in the end, the authoritarian who flooded Europe with weapons was undone by his own hand with a humble pocket pistol. Chapter 7. Heinrich Himmler. As head of Hitler's SS, Himmler wasn't known for battlefield heroics, but he sure appreciated a fine firearm, especially as a presentation piece. One notorious example is the extremely ornate Walther PP pistol attributed to Himmler, covered in elaborate engraving and nicknamed Himmler's personal Walther. That fancy PP was sold at auction for a whopping $287,500 in 2019. But more interesting and chilling were the special pistols Himmler commissioned as awards. In 1944, he ordered a handful of J.P. Zauer Model 38H pistols with his facsimile signature engraved on the slide. These weren't for himself. They were prizes for Nazi snipers. Any German sniper who killed 100 enemy soldiers would receive a Zauer 38H inscribed Dem Scharfschützen H. Himmler. Translation, to the sharpshooter, H. Himmler. Only 5 of those were known to exist, only having been captured at Hitler's own Berghof retreat. Himmler himself carried a sidearm, likely a standard Walther PPK or Luger, during the war, but he never fired it in anger. When arrested in 1945, he infamously used a cyanide pill, not a gun, to cheat justice. Interestingly, Himmler was a bit of a collector. He amassed antique firearms dating back to the 1870s, and even American Wild West guns, a strange hobby for an SS man. One could say Himmler preferred his guns gift-wrapped, either receiving or bestowing lavish pistols as tokens of Nazi esteem. Chapter 8. Benito Mussolini. Italy's fascist strongman loved his martial posturing, and that included packing a pistol. Il Duce was known to carry a Beretta Model 1934 .380 caliber pistol as his personal sidearm during World War II. This compact, made-in-Italy semi-auto was standard issue for Italian officers, so it fit Mussolini's image to wield the homegrown Beretta. In fact, when playing war correspondent in 1935, Mussolini posed for photos gripping a Beretta pistol, delightedly blasting away at targets. As the tides turned against him, his firearm figured in a grim final chapter. After Mussolini was captured by Italian partisans in 1945, he was executed by a burst from a French MAS-38 submachine gun, a foreign gun for a fate befitting a failed dictator. The MAS-38 fired a small 7.65 millimeter bullet, but at close range, it was lethal. On April 28, 1945, a partisan pulled the trigger and riddled Mussolini and his mistress with that SMG. It's said Mussolini's last words were to his executioners, "No, no." Not exactly macho. Ironically, the Golden Rule author of Make the Trains Run on Time met his end in a blood-stained ditch, his own pistol unused in its holster. His captured Beretta M1934 later went on display, a trophy of liberation. Mussolini's gun collection also included hunting rifles. He fancied himself a sportsman and was photographed with a shotgun on duck hunts. Chapter 9. Abraham Lincoln. Honest Abe's image is more tied to a Bible and stovepipe hat than to firearms. Yet Lincoln had a hands-on fascination with new weapons. During the Civil War, this self-taught backwoodsman turned president personally test-fired cutting-edge rifles right on the White House lawn. In August 1863, Lincoln met inventor Christopher Spencer, who brought his 7-shot repeating rifle to D.C. Lincoln, curious as ever, took Spencer out to the National Mall and proceeded to empty the rifle's 7-round magazine into a target 40 yards away, hitting the bullseye at least once. Witnesses say the Prez was thrilled. He sank 7 shots into a board about 3 by 6 inches, which is darn good shooting. Impressed, Lincoln ordered the Army to adopt this Spencer repeating rifle, overruling conservative generals who dismissed it as a newfangled gimcrack. One general scoffed that soldiers could kill enough men with old muskets. Lincoln's push for advanced guns like the Spencer and Henry rifles gave the Union a firepower edge. As for guns Lincoln personally owned, not many, but he did have some. He may have kept a small pistol for personal protection. After a death threat, Lincoln allegedly carried a Derringer pistol in his pocket for a while, the same type of gun that, sadly, would kill him. In his youth on the frontier, he certainly used muskets for hunting. A famous artifact is the Lincoln target board, the very plank he shot during the Spencer test, with 7 holes in it. It survives as proof that the great emancipator was also a pretty fair marksman. Want to understand the world better? Start with history and subscribe to our channel. Chapter 10. Che Guevara. The bearded Argentine revolutionary cut an iconic figure with a gun slung over his shoulder. Che's weapon of choice during the Cuban Revolution was the M2 carbine, a lightweight semi-automatic rifle, often converted to full auto, that was given to him by Castro's forces. In countless jungle photographs around 1957 to 1958, you'll see Che gripping an M2 carbine or wearing one across his chest. He favored this compact .30 caliber rifle for its maneuverability in guerrilla warfare. In battle, Guevara wasn't shy about using his firearms. He wrote in his diary about executing deserters and suspected traitors with his own pistol. As an insurgent commander, he also carried a .45 caliber M1911 pistol early on, and later a Browning high-power 9mm as a sidearm, especially during the Congo and Bolivia campaigns. One famous image from 1967 in Bolivia shows Che wounded, pistol in hand, just before his capture. It was a Browning high power, which he emptied trying to fight off Bolivian rangers, to no avail. In a twist of fate, Che was executed the next day with his own favorite type of weapon. The Bolivian sergeant ordered to kill him used an American-made M2 carbine to shoot Guevara in a schoolhouse on October 9, 1967. The soldier fired several bursts, hitting Che multiple times in the legs and torso. The man who had triumphantly waved a carbine in victory through Cuba died to the chatter of that same model gun. After his death, the Bolivians displayed his captured weapons as war trophies. Chapter 11. Fidel Castro. The Cuban revolutionary leader practically lived with a rifle in hand during his guerrilla days, and even after seizing power, he kept firearms close as symbols of defiance. In the mountains of the Sierra Maestra, 1956 through 1959, Fidel Castro and his Barbudos were armed with an eclectic mix, everything from old M1 Garand rifles to stolen Cuban Army Czech-made Mausers. Notably, Fidel and his brother Raul each had a Winchester Model 70 bolt-action rifle and .30-06 for hunting and sniping purposes in the rebel camp. As the revolution gained momentum, Fidel acquired captured M1 carbines and Garands, thanks to arms smuggled from the U.S. By the time they marched into Havana, Castro often carried a Fabrique Nationale FAL rifle, ironically, a Belgian-made arm that Batista's government had ordered. One iconic photo shows Castro in 1959 holding a Belgian FN rifle aloft while speaking to crowds. After aligning with the Soviet bloc, Fidel embraced the trusty AK-47. He was frequently photographed in military fatigues with an AK slung over his shoulder during the Bay of Pigs and Missile Crisis era, to demonstrate Cuba's readiness. Visitors to his offices noted an AK or an SKS propped in the corner. In the 1970s and 80s, Castro even received gift guns from fellow leaders. For instance, Soviet General Kalashnikov, the inventor, supposedly presented Fidel with a custom AK on a visit. Perhaps the most bizarre firearm moment came in 1960, when Castro visited Washington, D.C. and went to a shooting range. Using a .22 target pistol, he impressed onlookers by nailing bullseyes. The NRA even made him an honorary member, briefly, believe it or not. Castro also had a Colt Python .357 revolver he sometimes wore as a sidearm in the early 60s, likely taken from Batista's police. But as a man of the people, he rarely sported a pistol publicly. The rifle was his trademark. One memorable propaganda image shows Fidel wielding two rifles victoriously, one in each hand, after the Bay of Pigs defeat of U.S.-backed forces. Chapter 12. Osama bin Laden. The world's most infamous terrorist had an AK-47 as his constant companion. It became almost a supporting character in his propaganda videos. In the 1980s Afghan War, young bin Laden was photographed cradling a Type 56 Chinese AK, a variant of the AK-47, in mountain camps. Later, during his al-Qaeda years, bin Laden deliberately placed a short-barreled AKS-74U carbine within camera frame when recording his video messages from secret hideouts. That compact AK, with its distinctive folding stock and shorter length, was seen propped up next to him as he threatened the West, a visual prop meant to underscore that he was still in the jihad fight. It worked. The image of a tall, gaunt bin Laden with an AK at his side became iconic. Interestingly, bin Laden reportedly obtained one of his favorite AK-74Us as a war trophy from a Soviet soldier during the 1980s. He kept that gun for decades. Fast forward to May 2, 2011. U.S. Navy SEALs raided bin Laden's Abbottabad compound. In the final moments, the unarmed bin Laden peered out of his bedroom to see SEALs storming in. He never even reached for the AK leaning on a shelf by the door. After double-tapping bin Laden, the SEALs found his AK-47 and a Makarov pistol neatly on the shelf, untouched. So much for Die Hard Last Stand. The world's top terrorist went down without firing a shot. That AK-47, a standard 7.62 by 39mm rifle, not gold-plated or tricked out, was taken as evidence. It's reportedly now in the CIA museum, a quietly kept trophy. For years, U.S. intel analysts had speculated about bin Laden's weapons. There was a myth he had a special personal AK he took everywhere. Indeed, one captured al-Qaeda member said bin Laden's AK-47 was like his security blanket, and he wouldn't let anyone else touch it. However, in the chaos of the raid, bin Laden's AK stayed put. The Guardian later reported that bin Laden's guns were only found after he was killed, undermining any claim that he resisted with a weapon. Beyond the AK, Osama also carried a Russian-made Makarov pistol as a sidearm. The SEALs found that next to the AK. But again, he never used it when it mattered. If you could own any of these iconic guns from these leaders, which would it be and why? Let us know in the comments below. Here's another video history buffs enjoyed watching. Goodbye for now.